What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Paint Society. In this episode, we're going to be using only basic hand tools to fix this very basic scratch and this plastic bumper. So let's get started. Okay, and welcome once again to the channel. My name is Brian, and this is the channel where the learning doesn't stop when the video ends. So go ahead and leave a comment. We'll make sure we get back to you. Now, what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be going through the prepping process of how to repair this bumper with just basic hand tools, no air tools, no power tools, none of that. And we can do this because the scratch is very, very simple. So what we're going to be seeing in this video today is your basic blocks that are hook it, which means it is a Velcro, okay? And you can use any blocks. Dura blocks are great blocks as well, but they need to have just a little bit of a flex to them. So we're going to be using these two blocks today. We're also going to be using different grits. Now these papers can be used with a DA, or you can simply just wrap them around your block itself. So what we have is 180, we have 220, we have 320, and 400. So basically we're stepping up in grades of about 100. So let's get right to the bumper and let's show you how we're going to feather this out. Okay, so the term we're going to be using today is called feathering. And what feathering is taking the transition from the paint. So for instance, if this is the top of the paint, it's not broken. The person that's driving the car hit something, and now there is a little bit of a low spot right here, and the paint is now removed. And what we're going to be doing to feather this is we're going to be taking the paint around it, and we're going to be bringing it down a little bit with sandpaper. We'll be leveling it with the block, okay, and bringing down the surface so that it equals the same surface of the scratch. So effectively, what will end up happening is this will come just a little bit lower. This will come just a little bit lower. And then once we have it as smooth as we can, we are going to spray our filler primer. And that's just going to build just a little bit, just to give us a nice surface for paint, okay? And we're going to demonstrate that to you right over on the bumper now. I don't like to start off too aggressive, so I'm going to start off with 220 and see what it does. I'm going to focus on here. So this is where the paint is low. This is where the paint is, I don't want to say high, but is not touched. So what I want to do is I want to take this paint, okay, and I want to bring it down to the level of the actual scratch. So I'm going to wet it up because since we don't have power tools or air tools, it's going to want to get clogged up quicker, and this is going to help keep a smoother scratch. Now I'm starting with 220 just because, you know, when we're using it by hand, the scratch is going to be a little bit more tougher and rougher than it would with using a DA sander, okay? Okay. So let's take a look. What we have here is the scratch is starting to get feathered out. And it's as much as I want to do with 220. I don't want to make it rougher than what it is. I have the transition between now the plastic and the paint starting. So what I'm going to do is come over to my other areas, okay? I always want to hold the block flat, never like this, because that can create a dent. And the ones on the corners won't be as hard because the paint is thinner there. Okay, so far so good. Let's keep continuing to this one down here. Now for this one, I don't want to make the area too big. So what I can do is I can switch my block. I've got that same piece of sandpaper, and I'm just going to go over the same area that I've been working in, and I'm just going to keep it wet until it starts to smooth out. Now let's touch on our other areas. Same thing over here. Okay, so we're almost there. Now we have one that looks like it's broken to paint, but it actually just might be a paint transfer. So I got some lacquer thinner on a rag, gonna wipe it, and look at that. It goes away. So we wanna make sure that we identify what is going on first so we don't create more work for ourselves in the end. We're almost there. And you don't need air tools to do basic repair like this. The scratch wasn't too deep. We don't need any flexible filler because there is no actual damage beyond the scuff. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna be using 320 and we're gonna do something called bridging the repair. And what bridging the repair is kind of bringing all these little small repairs together, and that's gonna help for a smoother surface. So instead of having one here, one here, one here, what we're gonna do now is step up our grit to 320 and we're gonna smooth out the whole entire area, so that kind of levels the paint all in this area. So let's say our prep work isn't great after we prime. We don't have little dent here, little dent here, little dent here, little dent here, because we didn't properly smooth it all out at one time. So I'm gonna show you that right now. So for this, I have my 320 grit and I jump back to the fatter, wide, narrow block, and that's gonna cover more surface at one time. And I'm using that water once again just to kind of keep things wet and keep things a little bit smoother. It won't clog up that paper. And now we're gonna start to see our scratches start to get smoother at the edges of where we're feathering. Remember, feathering means to bring the transition between the scuff and the paint or the primer or whatever it might be to as even as possible. All layers are as even as possible. Looking even more like a cowl, which is a good thing. I want you to notice that around each one of these rings we have our outer edge of our plastic and paint. It's feathered out about, I would say, 3 or 4 millimeters, and that's what you want. You don't want just an abrupt feather. You want these rings right here, and you can see them more when you have primer, to be feathered out and smoothed out. That's going to help with the transition between the paint and the primer that's coming up. So now we're ready to do our back sanding, and back sanding is the area we're going to prepare around the actual repair, so that when the primer sticks to it, it has something to bite into, but it's not too rough of a grit. So here's how we back sand. Now to back sand, we can use our maroon scuff pad, or we can use our 400. I like the maroon scuff pad because we got a lot of contours in different areas, and it's going to leave just a little bit less aggressive scratch than it would with a 400. And the whole point of this right now before we prime is to not break through, because we want to create that, all you're looking to do is create that adhesion in the areas in which we're going to prime. So we'll use this with a little bit of water, or we can use this dry, and we want to take it about maybe 4 to 5 inches beyond where our harshest scratch would be is 320. So you see how we're stepping them up. We went from 220 originally starting, and then we went to 320, and now we're at 400. Okay, so we're all ready to prime. We took our 400 maroon scuff pad around this area, and then we went ahead and masked the areas off that we don't want primer right now, that we can just later scuff again and have it ready for paint. Now, for the purpose of the video, to stick to the theme, we're gonna be using our rattle can, but after this video is done, we got a lot more scratches in the bumper. We'll sand those down, and then we'll go ahead, and just for our warranty's sake, we'll put our 2K urethane primer on there. It's got a lot better holdout than a rattle can would. But all you do yourself is at home, go ahead, get yourself a decent 1K product primer. Remember that you're going to have to prep your scratches even finer sometimes, maybe go over it a few more times, make sure it's 100% smooth, because that rattle can will not fill those scratches like what I'm gonna put later on this bumper after the video ends, okay? So before you go ahead and put the rattle can, you do have some bare plastic here, so you need to put some adhesion promoter. Now when you put your adhesion promoter, it doesn't matter if it comes out of a rattle can, because this is a 1K product. It does not need a catalyst. It doesn't matter if it comes out of a spray gun. It doesn't matter if it comes out of an aerosol. It's the same thing. So you can go ahead and pick this up, and you're not gonna put a heavy coat. All you wanna do really is just lightly get those areas covered, and then let that flash about maybe 10 minutes, and then you're ready for your primer. And that's all there is to it. Okay, so I talked to you earlier about bridging a repair when it comes to sanding. Now let's apply that same concept when it comes to priming. We don't just want to put here, here, and here. We want to cover our whole entire area. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go to the extent of where our area is, the border, and then I'm going to work in, just to make sure that we're coming from out in, and then the next coat, I'll move in a little bit. This is kind of like a way to reverse prime. You want to hold this about maybe like 6 inches away. Now that's your first coat. It's not going to cover perfect. You don't want to try to cover it. Let this flash, let this dry, let the marriage happen between the primer and the surface itself. Once that's dry to the touch, you go ahead and put your next coat on. Give it about 8 to 10 minutes. Okay, our second coat, same concept. And now our third and final. We can now go a little bit heavier. Okay, so our primer's all dried, and you kind of see where we have just a touch of a rough spot. That's where the bare plastic was, and that's why it's so important to refine it. So now our next step, which we're going to show you, is we're going to just sand this primer. And what we're going to do is, I'm not going to use the block because the block can be a little bit too aggressive on that rattle can primer. I'm going to use a soft pad right here, and I'm going to use just a piece of 600, not even 400, what I would use on a 2K urethane. It just can't hold up. And you wouldn't be using a rattle can over something that has a lot of body work on it. It's not suggested. Small stuff, you should be fine. So once again, I'll use my guide coat to show me where I've sanded and where I need to sand. Just a light mist coat. And then you want to use that water. Get that wet. And we can kind of just gently go over this. I go in circles. It doesn't really matter too much. We're just smoothing out that primer and making sure that it is ready to paint. Okay, and like once again, we're dealing with an inferior product here. It just doesn't have the build. So really what we can do is we can put just a little bit more on since we've already got our first coat on, and then we let that dry and then hit it up another time just to make sure we have all of our bare plastic covered. Okay, so that's dried, that second pass of primer, and what I've done is I've got myself an 800, now just a little bit finer, and I'm still going to use that water, and I'm going to go over the whole entire thing. All right, so that second pass of primer and sanding, it looks a lot more uniform. It's ready to paint. From here, what will happen is we'll get 600 to 800 all over the whole entire bumper if you had a bumper that was ready for paint. In this case, it's not. It's got road debris. It's got other defects. And like I told you earlier, we're going to be sanding that down and repriming the whole entire thing with a 2K urethane out of the paint gun. So I don't want to make this video for you guys at home to show you can do this basic repair without any extensive tools. Although you want to get yourself a good compressor, you want to get yourself a good setup so you can expand the type of work that you do. But for those little do-it-yourselfers just trying to do a weekend project, this will apply to what you're doing at home. All right, guys, so I hope you enjoyed this video. This video is part of the card painting series, and there's many other videos in this series that will help you to help paint your car or different types of projects that you might have that are automotive based. So that's going to do it for this one. My name is Brian, reminding you, don't overthink it. It's just paint. I'll see you guys on the next one.